such a burst of energy this morning. You know what the secret is? The secret is Sukkot.
The best of both worlds.
Right? As soon as Yom Kippur is done, it's like Sukkot 4 days away, and you got to get
Right.
lulav and etrog and build the sukkah and take advantage of all. Like, I don't know. Can we, if we have the next class from my sukkah at home, can we stream from there still with our current? We can. Okay, so next week we'll be, if you're in our class but watching from home, next week we'll be in my sukkah. Email me for my address. I won't put my address on YouTube, even though it's easily findable. Somehow I think I shouldn't. But please come join me at my home next week, and we'll also stream from there, so you'll be able to enjoy, hopefully. Same time. Don't feel the need to bring anything. We'll all just stuff in the sukkah if possible, kind of turn around. But you remember when we discussed Pesach and Shavuot, we talked about how people think they're two separate holidays, but really it's an extension of Pesach into Shavuot. It's really one holiday. And we even saw it because Shavuot doesn't have a date on its own. It's just on the 50th day after Pesach, boom, Shavuot occurs. And in the time when they would rely on the moon and the sighting of the moon to set the date for Rosh Chodesh, there was a variation in what days Shavuot could actually arrive. So it actually floated with Passover. It didn't even have its own fixed date until later on. For various reasons, we won't get into the spirituality of that, but Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and all the way through Sukkot and Simchat Torah, the whole thing, that's also one flow, and they're also very related. And so good to understand now, we're not leaving behind one holiday and then waiting for an entirely separate holiday to arrive. It's really two aspects of the same theme that we're experiencing in this month of Tishrei. And the theme of Tishrei is, of course, the lower and higher levels of tshuva, that on the one hand you apologize for your sins and say you're sorry on Yom Kippur to God, and that returns the lower hey of the four letters of God's name. But there's also a higher aspect of tshuva where you can return the higher letter, the first hey of God's name, which is an entirely spiritual, almost internal process, not about correcting misdeeds. But that's the whole theme of Tishrei. It's all about tshuva. Now, tshuva has an external aspect and it has an internal aspect, like anything that's complex, right? So the external aspect that we've been dealing with at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that's the, I'm so really soul-searching and going through and finding the people I've wronged and apologizing sincerely and with simple sincerity approaching God and saying, I'm sorry and I'll resolve to be better. And we know what that's about. It's hard work, and that's what we've been doing until now. But once that's done, now the inner aspect of tshuva emerges, and that's just like in any relationship when there's been tension or conflict or disruption, and then it's repaired and brought together. How do we feel in the relationship after that? Joy. And how do you compare that joy to how it was before the disruption occurred?
Much higher.
Higher, right? So if you want to think about intimacy, the intimacy after a fight, right? Something about that. And even in a broader terms, the relationship after there's been disruption, when it's been truly repaired, now the relationship is deeper and stronger and there's more joy. So that's what all of Sukkot, all the different aspects of it are about, is about now that we've done the external aspects of tshuva, now the internal aspects emerge. And that's why Sukkot is called the holiday of joy, the time of our simcha. Right? It's just celebration. And so know that they're connected. We've been through the external part of tshuva. Now we get to enjoy the watching. So he'd bounce around. Every so often there were these vines you could find that were floating in the middle of the air. You had to jump up on them and find them in space, and you'd jump on them and they'd appear, and this vine would grow up, and you could climb up the vine, and you got to this other level where there were only coins, right? Down here you had to jump over a million dangers to get one or two coins. Up there it was just like, no, many coins. So for me, that's always like sukkahs. Because when you're in a sukkah, Every single thing you do is a mitzvah. There's two actually mitzvahs that involve your whole being. One is the mikvah, and the other is the sukkah. So just being a sukkah is a mitzvah, and even if I'm just playing cards with my buddies or with my family, now that's a mitzvah. And I've even elevated the playing cards in the game, right? I can be reading the newspaper in a sukkah. I can be hanging out, checking on my email in a sukkah, and all of it becomes a mitzvah. So the thing that during the year we have to kind of work and run and schlep and find the thing and look for the opportunity is just wide open in a sukkah. It's an amazing time to elevate on the spiritual plane as well. And we'll look at more technical details about it. Sukkah is a beautiful, beautiful, very sophisticated interface with all the energy that we brought down on Yom Kippur, which is now flowing lower and lower into creation. It's in very high spiritual levels right now, but it's here. And the sukkah helps it flow down into lower levels of creation so we can actually access it.
So can I just add one thing that I learned this morning?
Yeah.
In the morning prayers, and we'll say Tachman and asking for forgiveness for our sins.
Yeah.
We don't do that for the rest of the month.
Correct. So if you're doing Tachman,
so Rabbi Wise, if you miss it, we get a break now.
You miss Tachman?
No.
Oh,
That's what he
okay.
said. Do I miss it?
Oh, he said you miss it. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Do the Kabbalists have any influence on the high holidays? Certainly. I can't. I have to kind of read through and quote what the best sections are, but there's a lot of Kabbalistic inclusions in high holidays. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Right. Clearly, if you got like a one, which is one god, then you have three, which is Chacham Bin and Dad, and you have the seven midot, then you could find a lot of Hasidus, and you could write the Hasidus, right? That could be Chacham Bin and Dad, and then the seven midot, for sure. But the overriding concept there is that the four-letter name of God, the Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, and then Elohim, the name of God as God appears in nature, God as God hides as just normal repetition. The sun's rising, that's Elohim, right? It's still God. The two have a relationship where Elohim we experience every day, right? I breathe in and I breathe out. That's Elohim functioning. It looks like it's just physical breath. I could believe there's nothing behind it but molecules and energy, so to speak. Because God is able to hide as nature, and that's the name Elohim. Yud and Hey and Vav Hey, that's the most transcendent name we have. God entirely beyond any possible framework of conception. Right? God we can't relate to whatsoever. So what do we do at the end of Yom Kippur? We say, Ad Hashem, the four-letter name of God, Hu Elohim, is the name of God as God appears hidden in nature. And so we actually bring the transcendent down until we actually recognize the transcendent is the natural, and that becomes our new Elohim. Now leaps up, and what our Elohim was for last year, what our sense of just normal life is, now rises up to the level of the highest point we could conceive of the four-letter name of God, and then we start the new year from that level. So to say it more clearly, now last year's level of Yud and K and Vav and K, however I could connect to that, now that's my new level of Elohim, and I work upwards from there. Right? So it's really taking all the work of the holidays and cementing it by now that being my anchor for what my new level of just as God appears to my physical eyes. And that was my level of transcendent God from last year. Now I'm going upward from that. I don't know if that was simpler. Right. Is that where we are? 272? Here you go. So we're in chapter 19. Anyone else need a copy today or for any reason? Right, so we've been looking at the second meditative technique, which is less meditative and easier to apply, although longer to learn. And we're relying on a hidden love, an ava misuteret, which we understand is in the chokhmah of the divine soul of every single Jew. And that love is a love so powerful that it absolutely cannot be disconnected from God. So once we understand we have this hidden love, this dormant love, we want to find a way to learn how to leverage it. We haven't gotten to that yet, but we know that it's there. We know that it's above intellect. So no matter what I may have thought in my life or what my worldview may have been, it still could be dormant. It is dormant under that. And we also understand that once it is triggered, an innate mechanism happens where the chokhmah will just flare open, awake, active, and now suddenly someone who may have not been so overtly connected to Jewish practices or Jewish thought will actually give up their life rather than bow down to an idol or be separated clearly from the Ein Sof in some way. So makes no rational sense. There's actually no calculation involved. And we all have this chokhmah, hidden love within our consciousness, often buried very deep, like an old friendship we said might be sort of forgotten, but it's there, ready to be woken up. So what we want to learn is how can we take that and use it to bring ourselves to a higher level state just in everyday life. And we compared it to the flame of a candle, that the divine soul itself is like a candle flame that always wants to rise up and almost leap off the wick and thus extinguish itself. And that's the level of love in the hidden love in the chokhmah of the divine soul that we're now working with. So very different from the tvuna emotions that we used in the long short path, which were not fiery emotions that would cause one to give up one's life by any extent. You might not even consciously feel them the way you would get excited about a new movie or fresh brownies. I get excited just thinking about them, especially yesterday. Right? So they may not be conscious for different reasons, but they are still just as effective at elevating Torah mitzvahs in our meditation. These are the opposite. Once the chokhmah of the divine soul ignites in this way, now it's palpable emotions so strong that I would give up my life, and we've seen it many times. Yes. $269. Where on the page are you looking? Ah. Yes. So that's talking about the candle flame, if it were actually to leap up and join the source of fire, call it, or if it were to enter into the globe of the sun, then we ask the question, is there really a candle flame there in the sun? If I were to take a candle and reach with a sunproof hand into the sun with the candle, and now I have a candle with a flame in the sun, right? Is there anything left of the flame? Does it exist? And I would say no. Once you're in the sun, there's just sun, right? I mean, there's so much atomic energy and power and fire there that the candle flame now is non-existent. It has no identity. It makes no contribution. It's gone, right? So the same thing with our soul. If our divine soul, were to get what it wanted and truly reunite with the Ein Sof, which is its source, it is a little piece of the Ein Sof down here. If it were to leap back up and reunite with its source, that's the state it would be. It would have nothing left of its own existence, because it would recognize all it is Ein Sof, and in there it's just infinity with no divisions and no identities. There'd not even be a soul, right? Just Ein Sof, just infinity. So that's just to give us a sense of how powerful that love is, that hidden love is, that the soul would even extinguish itself. That's all it wants. It's a totally irrational drive. I'm not gonna go there. It's good. I'm not gonna. You can review the end of chapter 1 when we looked at that theme. I don't want to go too deep into it. We can talk after class if you like. Yeah. Well, it depends what level you're talking about, right? So everything depends on the level of the discussion. So on the level of normal consciousness, the soul is a piece of the Ein Sof. It is infinite and it never dies. and certainly compared to my self-centered consciousness, the nefesh b'amit, which does end. The soul is eternal and never dies, right? But if that soul, that when the soul's eternal, it's at its level in heaven, call it, appreciating the light of the Ein Sof, that's the soul's eternal state. But if the soul could leap past that to actually rejoin the Ein Sof itself, now there's no soul. So from our level, it is eternal. From the soul's level, it's a created being. And we're at 272. All right? Yeah. Ela shegalut hazeh livchinat chochma אינו אלא לבחינת המתפשטת ממנה בנפש כולה להחיותה. Go ahead, this exile. Yeah. Bottom, fourth spot here, but this exile. Yeah.
Oh, but this exile of the faculty of chokhmah, that's only that aspect of which it is diffused throughout the message and animates it with the divine.
So we've been talking about the exile of Chokhmah, right? If you remember, we have this spark that so loves and has respect for the Ein Sof that it would give up our life, any one of us, and yet it can be in exile. That power, that energy that is the source of our whole being, that is the power that is allowing me to even physically speak and move my right hand, that power can be trapped in whatever consciousness I decide, and I can decide to do whatever I want. And I can slap someone in the face, I can do horrible things, I can say mean things. So I can use that spark of Chokhmah for the exact opposite of what it was intended and why I'm here on the planet. And now that spark of Chokhmah that only wants to do other-centered things and be productive is now in exile within my choices. But only the part that actually diffuses and powers the lower aspects of the soul. So while the Chokhmah can be in exile because I decide I'm going to be out for Michael Smolesh and who cares what people around me think, and now that spark of Chokhmah, all my Bina is working for number one and is taking that spark and turning it into a self-centered activity, and it's all Nefesh B'Amit. It's only the aspects from Bina onward that are in exile. Right? So Bina, Das, my emotions, my physical aspects, thought, speech, and action. The spark of Chokhmah, its energy is in exile in those, but as we'll see, never the spark of Chokhmah itself. The spark of Chokhmah itself, on its own, is not ever in exile. It has another state it can be in. Aval Shoresh. Interesting. A question occurs to me. I don't know the answer to this. If someone's read anything. So he says, he mentions that it's because it's in the brain. So it doesn't clothe itself in the klipa, which is in the heart. But of course, Bina is also in the brain, isn't it? So why is it Bina can be in exile? Clearly, Bina can be in exile. There is a difference, he says. Interesting. Because the point he's making is that Chokhmah is never trapped in the klipa. Clearly, Bina can be trapped in the klipa. But so why is it because it's in the brain? You see what I mean? It's a question. I've never noticed that. Well, not. It couldn't be because it's in the brain, because Bina is also in the brain, and I can think all day long. What's that?
He's saying because the brain is not closed.
Well, actually, I'm wondering, because Chokhmah is in the brain, and so is Bina in the brain in the same way. And Chokhmah is never closed in the sackcloth, but Bina is affected. So why did he mention because it's in the brain as being the reason if Bina isn't affected, and leave that as an open question? Like exile physically. So if here we are, we're Americans, and we can decide and vote for our president, and we can make laws, and we can live the way we want. If, God forbid, some powerful country came and took over America, hard to imagine, and we were exiled to another country, and we were kept there under their laws and weren't citizens. Now I don't have control over my environment. I can't necessarily live the way I want to, and I'm stuck. I'm stuck under someone else's control. Exile. It's the same thing here. The spark of Chokhmah just wants to help people around me and do good things and grow and learn and be the best Jewish people we can. But then it descends into my consciousness, and now there it has another set of rules. And if Nefesh Ba'amit is the one that's thinking, speaking, and acting, now Chokhmah's there powering these actions that it really doesn't want to do, and yet it's not under its own control anymore once it's down in my lower order levels of the soul. The animal soul. Yeah, and the klipa and all that stuff. Which in real life is just bad decisions, right? Someone says something to me and I snap at them, right? That's klipa. That's self-centered activity. That's superficial activity. But what's powering that, right? What's the energy behind that? It's always Chokhmah, the divine soul. That gives the whole thing its juice, right? But now the Chokhmah, the divine soul, is actually making that hurtful comment. So that's a form of exile. It doesn't want to be saying these things, and yet it is. But so that's the point. However, is that the point of Chokhmah is not affected in the same way as every other level. I could live an entirely self-centered life, and that could be more and more my personality. I just wake up, and that's what I do 24/7. And whether I hurt people around me or not, I don't even care. And that's total klipa. That's total nefesh b'mit running the show. However, I still have this spark of chokhmah, and it's never been affected by the klipa in the same way. It's not in that sackcloth. It's not covered up in the same way. It still is pristine, and that's because it is above any conscious process, as we said. So no matter what construct I've built in my life that's causing me to be so self-centered, perhaps, God forbid, the spark of chokhmah has never been affected by that. I would think yes. I say that with some trepidation. But yeah. Yeah, it's more hidden, obviously. Yeah, in a tzaddik, the chokhmah of the divine soul flows completely out through every pathway, through every thought, speech, and action, and it's just completely in charge, and they are totally other-centered and totally God-centered. That's a tzaddik, which is a very rare and lofty thing. In a Rasha, it's exactly the opposite. I don't know if you're saying a complete Rasha. Let's leave that out of it. But yeah, that's what you're saying. You cannot leave it out of it. You can get extreme, say a complete Rasha and a complete tzaddik. So they're the same spark of chokhmah, and I believe the answer is yes. Yes.
But it's because of the fact no matter what happens in your whole life, a lot of times it's somebody's deathbed, they make a decision they want to do something with their Judaism. That's always there. You can you can be a Rasha your whole life, and before you die, you may feel that you want to do something before God so that you can. Yeah. And
you raise a beautiful point, which is that at that level of chokhmah, each one of us is a complete tzaddik. Right? It's not something we're ever conscious of. But if we could live our life just back at that state of that spark of chokhmah, there we are all tzaddikim. Right? But the problem is my soul descends to a lower point and is rooted at a lower point, and then my education might not have been such that my best qualities are brought to the fore, etc., etc. So in real life, I'm far from a tzaddik. But yeah, at that point of chokhmah, every Jew at that pristine level is also a tzaddik. What's the distinction that he makes? It does clothe itself in the klipa, and yet he says later on, I forget where, that while it's difficult for a normal person to transform the midot, the emotions of the soul, completely so that they become a tzaddik, with intense training and learning and meditation, you can actually, a normal person can transform the chabad of their soul because it's less affected by the klipa. So there's a distinction. This is kind of for the more for the people that have been with us the whole time. This is not for like people that are just joining us. If you're on, but he later on makes a distinction. He says, in the way that you can't, or he might have already said it. Remember what chapter that was? Me neither. So he says you can't. A normal person can't transform the midot completely of the animal soul to become a tzaddik. All you can do is be a beinoni, right? So your animal soul still has the same midot, and I'm just not expressing them. I'm limiting them. But that's not true of chokhmah bin and dad. There, if I spend many years learning texts and meditating and focusing on productive things, I can actually transform my Chabad so that it is all divine soul, so to speak. So it's less affected by the klipa, but it certainly is affected by the klipa because you can think about negative things, right? I mean, I can decide to think about anything. So that's bina, and if bina focuses on something negative, now that's bina in klipa, right? So we know about that. Yes, everybody has an animal soul, but in tzaddik, the animal soul has kind of become a second divine soul because its nature has been transformed, but it still has two souls. Correct. It's only a power source. It's the driving. It's the vitality. Yeah. So a Bainani might actually live a quite rigid existence where they're forcing themselves to do the right thing, but their animal soul is just not wanting to go along with it. At tzaddik, the animal soul is just enthusiastically along for the ride. So at tzaddik really can go into the world and gracefully do the other-centered thing with tremendous energy, and that's why they can transform whole communities so easily, right? Because their animal soul has become it's the steed that the mind is riding on, and it can rush towards anything with much more energy. That's the yeah, we've seen situations where say the majority of the animal soul can be dormant and they can wake up again, but that's about conscious control from the animal soul being dormant. That's not about the energy not being there, right? So it's like the animal soul is sleepwalking, if you like. It can sleepwalk around and just do exactly what the divine soul wants. Don't go too far in that metaphor, but the sleep was another aspect. Good questions. So speaking of sleeping, rak shehi bivchinat shena, rashayim ve'ena poelet pulata bahem, kol zman she'asukim bedatam uvinatam betavot haolam. Yeah. The soul faculties. Right? So here's a big distinction. Most of our soul, the divine soul, can be in exile. And certainly our conscious faculties, thought, speech, and action, everyday life, our divine soul is often in exile. It's the most common state. Right? If we're honest, now that we've learned what the divine soul is, how often in our lives are we truly expressing our divine soul? Or is it really just a relative issue, right? Relative to my normal state, now I'm being more other-centered. But to say that truly the divine soul is now in control of everything, that's a multi-leveled question, right? But the way that the chokhmah, the divine soul, can be in exile in the rest of the body, it's in its own state. The actual chokhmah, the divine soul itself, as it is, it can never be in exile. It can only be dormant. Yeah, so it's bored with this stuff. It's taking a nap, right? No one's knocked on its door for a while, and it's just gonna take a siesta. So what's the difference between? We looked at it a little last week. What's the difference between something that's in exile and something that's dormant? You can, of course, yeah. That's the work, right? But what's the difference once you have it? If I have a very trusted security guard that's guarding my house and my property and running security system the way some important people have, right? That keeps me secure and it's good. It's in place. If someone were to take them and fly them out of the country, and now there's nobody protecting my home, they're in exile, right? If they were forcibly removed somehow from the country, someone swept them off, or did whatever, bribed them and said, "Come here, fly to this country." Now they're in wherever, and here I am with no security, right? And now I may be vulnerable if someone has bad intentions, God forbid. If they're all there, they just happen to be napping because it's the middle of the night and they're dozing. Okay, that might not be the best thing, but that's a very different situation, right? Because if something happens and there's a beep that goes off, what are they going to do? Wake up, boom, they're right there, ready to act. I'm really, okay, it's not a good idea for them to be dozing. We'd rather they be alert and on the job. But if they're still there, they're just dozing, that's a problem that's much easier to deal with and that can change in the blink of an eye. If they're in if they're in Europe, right, and there's no one in my house, now, God forbid something happens, they're powerless, right? I mean, they're not even around. So that's the difference between the spark of Chokhmah that's in exile in the lower aspects of myself, my normal consciousness. If it's in exile, it's done, right? I mean, it's a lot more work to bring it back. If it's just sleeping, if it was never gone, it's just taking a little doze, now the moment some alarm rings, the moment something happens, it'll wake up and it'll do what it does. So that's why this technique is so accessible to everyone and so easy and so successful for stressful situations, is because the work of transforming my midot back, as you said, bringing them out of exile, that's the long short path. And once I've done that, now it's all accessible to me, but it takes a lot of work. I've got to actually transform the midot of the animal soul. Here I'm dealing with something that's not in exile, it's just dormant. Life, just life, bad decisions. He'll talk about the spirit of folly. But, imagine just everyday life. One day I say, wouldn't it be fun to go to the casino for an hour and drop $20 that I don't need and see the excitement. And then the next thing I'm like, that was fun. Let me go back to 50. And then 2 years later, I'm an addict to gambling and I've lost my house, right? So how did that happen? Just gradual bad decisions. And now I'm trapped in the clip and I'm in exile and I'm addicted to gambling, God forbid, right? So pick your poor decision. We can always just get deeper and deeper into that. That's how it happens, and this is how you pull yourself out. But that spark of Chokhmah is never in exile, it's only dormant. It can't be covered up by any conscious activity because it's above anything conscious. However, yeah, well, when if I'm preoccupied, right? If I'm preoccupied, it's not that if you're doing a mundane pleasure, that you're automatically have your Chokhmah in exile. Like, you got to drive to work, and you got to pay the bills, and you got to, yeah, and specifically mundane pleasures, right? So if I'm preoccupied and I'm spending all my time thinking about brownies or movies, and that's my focus, and that becomes my identity. I love movies. I'm waiting for the next movie. That's what I live for. Now it becomes dormant because it doesn't occur to me that I should figure out what my family needs or how my kid's education is doing or what temple needs me to do more or less of to be a better place, right? I'm thinking about movies, mundane pleasures. So when you're preoccupied with mundane pleasures, yes, doesn't mean a person who their divine soul can't decide to take a break so they can be more relaxed with their family and do something mundane for 20 minutes, right? You understand? You were trying to make a point there, it seems like. Okay, it's good. Stop thinking about movies. Oh my God, what did they do to Star Wars? It kills me. The first 3 were so good. Then the green screens. I love you all. כשבאים לידי ניסיון בדבר אמונה, שהיא למעלה מהדת ונגעה על הנפש, מבחינת חוכמה שבה. Where are we at, however? אזי היא נאורה משנתה ופועלת פעולתה בכוח השם המלובש בו. כמו שכתוב, ויקץ כי ישן השם. Beautiful line, right? That God awakens as one out of sleep. That we could be living life just thinking about me, and then a test comes along and prods it. And like that moment, God forbid, where I'm sitting at a meal of unhealthy food and smoking a cigarette and drinking too much wine and doing all these things that might influence my health poorly, and I get a little cherry pits stuck in my throat, God forbid, and suddenly now I'll do anything to get it out because I know that my source of life is threatened, and now suddenly I'm very high functioning when just 5 minutes before I might have been doing things that seem to be counterproductive for my health, right? Same thing here. The moment the actual point of chokhmah is triggered, now I become very high functioning. I can make any decision. I can overcome any obstacle. So much so that la'amod b'nisayon be'emunat Hashem bli shum tam v'dad v'sechel musag lo. Right, so this is what we discussed, that there's many examples throughout Jewish history where not just the elite, not just the very learned, not just the very committed, but really seemingly everyday Jews sacrifice their lives rather than do an almost nominal act of denial of Judaism. Because I can bow down to a cross or whatever today, and God knows I didn't mean it, right? Because God knows my heart, and I'm just faking it, and I'm saving my life so I can do a lot more mitzvahs. I can do the calculation. Why on earth would anyone not take that option ever? Right? Why on earth would somebody, especially, just lives an ordinary life and kind of does basic Jewish stuff, but not super committed, and will cut corners here and there, or maybe even less overtly connected to Jewish practices? Why on earth would that person then give up their lives rather than nominally bow down to a cross or do something else historically? And yet we've seen it all the time. En masse, so many Jews have done that, and Jews that, looking at their life, the math doesn't add up there. That's because of this spark of chokhmah. Once, wherever in history, someone came to a town and rounded up the Jews and said, anyone who doesn't bow down to this or that, is going to lose their head. Suddenly, all these sparks of chokhmah ignite, and now suddenly you have a village of tzaddikim that simply can't, as you said, at that level they simply can't separate themselves from the Ein Sof, and there's no calculation. Right, so it's a love so powerful that it has many times driven us to that. What? All right. Lo Hashem lechelko. Sorry, where was I? And to prevail. Yeah, I see what you mean. That for people that were living, that gets into a complex discussion we'll get to later. To prevail, is that where we are? להתגבר על הקליפות ותאוות עולם הזה, בהיתר ובאיסור שהורגל בהם ולמאוס בהם. So in this state, so the past system we're using, I might have loved to do some counterproductive behavior, but I actually learned to control my thought, speech, and action, and to some extent to get my animal soul to slowly transform. So something that I love that was really a counterproductive thing that I shouldn't have in my life by my standards, I might slowly shift that emotionally, even as my thought, speech, and action is avoiding it. Here, it's the opposite. Here, something that I'm in the habit of indulging in, I'm accustomed to, it's really part of my personality, I enjoy it. Suddenly, now that thing is disgusting. I can't. It's like I would sooner eat I would sooner eat a pile of compost as do this thing, right? Why would I do that? Horrible. So now suddenly, effortlessly, I can overcome what once may have been a very difficult self-destructive habit. Someone says, "Bow down to this cross, or I'll kill you." Right? Or there's a few categories of things that technically are supposed to separate you from the Ein Sof. There's idol worship, there's murder, and then there's sleeping with a person that you're not supposed to sleep with, right? So find some random woman, you go, have sex with her, or I'm going to shoot you. Yeah. So that halakhically, the Jewish brain, the divine soul goes ping. It's like and now suddenly, 10 minutes ago, I might have, God forbid, I might have looked at this woman and said, "Oh," and have some daydream. Now that someone's ordering me to have sex with them in a very inappropriate fashion, now the thought is disgusting to me, right? Or you name it, right? So there are certain things that do trigger this, and we'll see that line actually, for the majority of Jews historically, it's been conversion to another religion, bow down to a cross, these things. But there's certain situations where it slides around, but everybody has that line where they know this will separate me from the Ein Sof. And that's where even in Spain, where there were Marranos who lived overtly an external life of Christianity, even they, when if they were caught, God forbid, the inquisitors, what's the name for the people of the Inquisition? Yeah, the inquisitors would say, "Okay, we caught you. You weren't really a Christian. You were really a secret Jew. Now we're going to burn you alive. But if you convert to Christianity, we'll be kind to you. We'll just kill you and burn your body, and you'll be spared being burned alive." And to be extra cruel, they would actually pack their body with wet cloth and wet, so that they would live longer. Their heart wouldn't get burned. They would live longer in the fire. Horrible, horrible way to die. And these Jews in Spain who had already converted to Christianity, like they had already broken this rule, right, and had that happen. So that should disqualify this, right? But the line just slid, right? So even they who had already converted to Christianity, there was a line they knew in their life that now, if I've been caught and now I'm really going to convert to Christianity, I can't do it, and I'd sooner actually be burned alive in an auto da fe rather than have an easy death, rather than cross that line, right? So even for us, we look at that and we're like, hold on, if they convert to Christianity, isn't this against what we're saying? Even they had a line. It's just in that rare situation in history that it moved. But once they hit it, once they said, now this is really going to separate me from the Ein Sof and from my basement of secret Seder rituals and Hanukkah candles, I can't do it. I can't do it, even just to have an easier death. And also keep in mind, they were living a constant life of self-sacrifice in those times, right? So lest we look at them and say, well, why didn't they give up their lives? They were risking their lives every time they bought maror on Pesach. So there was an element of self-sacrifice in their whole lives and everything they did. Tangent. See, there's a distinction here, right? Because of course we have people that have converted to other religions, and we'll get to that. So the difference between saying, what if I choose to bow down to a cross, versus what if someone forces me to bow down to a cross? I'm guessing in your life no one has done that, right? I mean, we live a free life, so I've never been forced to. So what we're told is, in those situations where someone says, do this or die, that's what will ignite it, right? Now, can I, for whatever reasons, decide to convert? We see that sometimes is the case, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. Yeah, that's a calculation. Those calculations. Sure. And you know, I hear what you're saying. That in theory, I also would look at that and say, why wouldn't I just bow down? It makes no sense. But that's what we're saying. This moment that we experience when we're threatened in this way and challenged in this way, something ignites that's above those calculations. So definitely, every one of us would look at it and say, of course I would bow down and live. Are you kidding me? Right? That's the rational calculation. But why is it that these people didn't? Why is it when they were there, that calculation went out the window? It's chokhmah of the divine soul, something else, right? So the chokhmah of the divine soul looks at that calculation I made 5 years ago in a Tanya class where I said, well, I'm going to bow down to the cross when it comes to it. It looks at it and says, yeah, but I'm chokhmah. I'm above being. I'm above consciousness. You had no idea what chokhmah was down in your rational consciousness. So no matter what calculation we think is the right one in intellect, in conscious intellect, superconscious intellect is still there with this love that will defy that. That's the explanation for why so many Jews have given up their lives. But we're going deeper into this, finding situations than we need to, right? We're using this more for our own beautiful, free lives, or we can now try and overcome personal challenges rather than get caught up in well, would I really do that? And then believe for and choose God. Believe for lo Hashem lefelko legoralo. Yeah. Yeah, I do want to get to our meditation today, so let me finish with a quick story. It's not about ordinary people expressing self-sacrifice, but a real tzaddik, and showing how he's studying in France at the time as a young man. And so there he was, him and his wife, in Nazi-occupied France, and they happened to be Russian citizens, and Russia had a neutral relationship with Nazi Germany, and so Russian citizens were left alone to some extent. But everybody knew at this point who the Nazis were and what the Gestapo was. And when they invaded France, the Gestapo went around to every single house and asked what religion they were, and made careful notes who was living where and who was who. And when they came to the Rebbe's house, he was out and his wife was home, and they asked, and she answered, "We're Orthodox," right? Which, okay, that can mean a number of things, right? So they wrote down "good Orthodox," and they went on. And so, she felt that they had sort of slipped under the radar to some extent, and maybe that would help them if things went the same way they had gone in Poland, God forbid, which of course they did. And when the Rebbe came home, there in the midst of Nazi-occupied France, and his wife told him the Gestapo came, and when they asked what religion we were, I said Orthodox, so they might think we're Greek Orthodox. He actually went to the Gestapo headquarters in Paris, and he said, "My name is Menachem Mendel Schneerson. I live at this address, and please change my registration. We're not Orthodox, we're Jewish Orthodox." To their face, to the Gestapo, knowing who they were. This is, and he came from Russia, and he knew very well what was happening all across Europe. Now, why would he do that, right? Isn't the smart thing to do to say, good, maybe if they decide to round up the Jews, they'll skip us and they'll miss us and we'll be saved. I mean, this is what people did. And yet this person, in real life, in real time in that situation, walked right into the Gestapo headquarters, and he could not live with the fact that in some way he had been represented as being not Jewish. Even to that extent, even on a piece of paperwork that the Gestapo was holding. So that's a very extreme thing to do from a tzaddik, from a very extreme kind of personality. But that's the level that we can access just in our everyday lives. If there's something that's challenging, that's like, I really shouldn't, I really don't want to, but boy, right? Or this is really, I'm going to start yelling in this, or whatever it is. I hit that moment, and I can have a tool that will get me to that place where I would walk into the Gestapo office and I'd say, no, this is who I am, and I'm sticking with it. Right? I decided I'm not going to do this in my life. I'm not going to do it, no matter what I'm feeling right now. I decided I'm going to do this, and even if I feel like sleeping in, I'm going to get up and do it. and I can have that same resolve and firmness as that actual person that actually did that with the Gestapo. Yeah. The Rebbe spoke, I assume you know, Russian, German, French, English, Yiddish, of course, Hebrew, Aramaic. They might speak in French. He loved French. He often had conversations with people in French. You know, his secular accomplishments are quite stunning, considering he spent all his time learning Torah, dealing with Torah. He actually became an engineer in Germany in a German engineering school, sitting in the back of the class, you know, with a book of Torah in his hand the whole time, barely paying attention, and he passed all the courses and became an engineer. We're not exactly sure why someone in that world would do that. It's kind of an unusual thing, but there's really phenomenal stories of his knowledge of just, and languages was among that. I know he had a thick accent. If you ever hear him speaking English, he sounds like he can barely speak English. But if you listen to the vocabulary, his English is actually quite remarkable, as like maybe I don't know if it's 10th language or something for him. There was a lot of like his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. There's a lot of pressure from United States, who were neutral at that point, to try and diplomatically get them out. And so his father-in-law, the Rebbe, got out of Poland because of that. And similarly, there were efforts to get them out, and he actually had a ticket for a boat. It seemed like it was one of the last boats to get out of Paris, and they were going to get on the boat. He got a telegram from his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was already in New York, saying, "Don't get on the boat," which this was the kind of thing that they would do. And so, again, there he was, tickets to a boat to get out of Nazi-occupied Germany, France, and who knows if there's going to be another boat. And yet, his Rebbe, his father-in-law, told him, "Don't get on the boat," and he just tore up the tickets or whatever and didn't get on the boat. And that boat was sunk by a U-boat, and presumably everybody died on it. And he got tickets out on another boat and managed to get across. And there's a video of him arriving in North America. So crazy, crazy stories. All of this, yeah. That goes along with it. Yeah, very, yeah, yeah. You know, this is not a calculation. You can look at it and say, even like morally, like there's so much weight on the side of just make the compromise. It makes no sense whatsoever why a person would do that. It makes no sense why a person would give up their life. You know, let's one last piece, right? There's last minute. No, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. So Chana, you know, from the Tanakh, Chana had 7 sons, right? And so those sons, the story is horrible. Chana was brought before this king, and all of her sons were asked to bow down to some idol. And one by one, they all said no. One by one, they were all killed. Right? And the last son was like a boy, a young boy. Of course, this boy should just do what he needs to do and get out of the situation. And not only that, the king, to save face, because now he'd been seen in front of his whole court, to not be able to persuade a bunch of peasant Jews to bow down to something at the face of death. You know, this king was powerless over them. He was so embarrassed. He said to the boy, "You know what? Don't bow down. I'm going to take my ring, right? My royal ring, this glittering thing that would make a boy so curious. They've never touched anything like that. I'm going to drop it on the ground. All I have to do is bend down and pick up my ring, right? So it'll appear to the court that you're bowing down to this idol, but all you're going to do is pick up this ring and give it to me." It's in the Tanakh. Sorry, the Book of Maccabees. Thank you. Book of Maccabees, right? And the boy refused to do it, and like his brothers, was killed, right? So that's the power of this. We look at it and we say it's wrong, it's irrational, it's just the wrong call. It makes no sense, and that's the essence of Chokhmah. Chokhmah is above sense. Sense is in Bina, right? Even like my conscious understanding of morality is in Bina. People say it's an immoral thing to do, to put my family in danger, to say I'm Jewish to the Nazis, right? It's a wrong thing to do. Yet, when that spark of Chokhmah is operating, it's so powerful that it won't let me even if it's the right thing morally that I can work at, it won't let me do it. Even if it's just touching the fringes of something and not really doing it, like this boy that all I do is pick up a ring, It won't let me do even that because it'll appear to someone that I'm disconnected from Judaism. Once it's awake, it's so powerful that it can overcome any of that, almost in a way that seems to us repugnant, right? Morally wrong. I'm not saying we need to do that. God forbid any of us should ever be in the situation. All I'm saying is the Alter Rebbe is giving us a triggering mechanism to take that intense drive and love and commitment and now use it in very mundane situations where there's no moral call, right? I mean, do I really want to, yell at a colleague when I could just explain it calmly? No, right? There's no moral question there, right? Might I lose my cool and do it? Yeah. Will this give me a technique to now overcome that moment and say, well, if I wouldn't even bend down and pick up a ring to appear to be bowing down to an idol, how much easier is it not to give my life, but just to not say this thing, right? And that's the plane where we're using it. So I know when we discuss it, it brings up like feelings of like, hold on, is this even right? And we should have those feelings because we're not operating at the level of Chachma, the divine soul. We're operating at a conscious level, and the conscious level should look at that and say, I don't know, right? But that's not the point. The point for us is this level of love is there, it's active, it's dormant. And if it can do that, if it can let me walk into a Gestapo's office and say, no, Michael Smolish is a Jew, it can also let me not eat something or not say something or do something or wake up or lose an hour of sleep to help somebody or go out and change someone's flat tire, right? That's the decisions we're working with. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks everybody. Sorry to go longer and not do the meditation. Please continue in your homes. I'm around to discuss other thorny issues or moral questions. You think so? You think so? Which